start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How do you know David, and when did you guys meet?
So my name is Kayla. Currently I am actually a therapist. I work at an inpatient behavioral health hospital. And I actually met David when we were freshmen. It was the first day of freshman year. We met in history class. And then it wasn't until later that year, not even like that year, it was like that week that we realized that we also had like our music block together. So that was really like the first time I remember meeting him was in history class, that first day.
No.
Sure. I'm a senior label programmer for a pharmaceutical software company that handles all new store projects. And I met David in Westfield, New York on August 23rd, 1991, when he was born into this world at 10:45 a.m. I'm his father.
Okay. David's my son. Technically my stepson. He's my son. Sorry. He was 11. We met at a Burger King the first time. We went up to his biological mom to pick him up. We met at Burger King, and right away we just instant. On the ride back, he wanted to play checkers, little magnetic checkers in the back seat. Um, just getting to know each other, and it was just an instant attachment to each other. So.
Tell us your name.
I'm sorry. Amanda Gilliberti.
How would you describe David? Like, what was his favorite thing to do?
Um, the Whenever I think about like whenever somebody asks me how to describe him, the easiest thing for me to say is that he was hilarious. He was always joking around. He absolutely loved music. And that was really the basis of our friendship was just throughout our music block, orchestra, choir, marching band. He loved hanging out with his friends. He loved being with all of us. He loved his family. He loved his grandma. He loved helping her watch the kids for daycare. Yeah.
Uh, David was very fun, gentle, loving, very bright individual. He did stay very busy with himself, always enjoying playing with Legos and Rubik's cube, and basically anything he could get any kind of gadget he could get his hands on. So.
David was funny. He loved to make people laugh. Um, Always making jokes about everything. Uh, he loved music, anything music. If he could play an instrument, he wanted to play it all the time, along with video games. But he also loved to work out and like ride his bike. And he used to ride his bike about 12 miles one way to come see me at work during the summer when he wasn't in school. Um, so, I mean, yeah, probably music and riding a bike. And photography. He loved photography.
Um, what would you say David had a happy childhood overall?
Yes, he had two households, or split family. So, well, with any kid has had those kind of back and forth type things. But yeah, overall he was happy.
Um, at a young age, David had to cope with having ADHD. It wasn't diagnosed right away. I would say sometime after 3 years of age. But yeah, for the most part, he just had a great youth growing up. So.
What was something you and David did together? Like, besides music, of course.
um, Geez, everything. My my first memory of just like hanging out with David, because that's really all we did was he would come over to my house and we'd hang out a lot. Was him having dinner with my family. I'll never forget it. My mom always laughs about it still too. My mom always makes spaghetti for dinner when we have like friends over, and he told my mom that he was allergic to tomatoes after he had already like eaten half of the spaghetti. So like every time we hung out, that was like him. He would always just like joke around and like make silly jokes like that. Um, but we would always just like hang out at my house, watch movies, talk. Like that was like the biggest thing that we did.
Yeah. Would you describe him as like a jokester,
Oh
just
yeah.
like playing pranks on people? And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it was always like good-hearted though. It was never like to hurt anyone or anything. It was just
Yeah.
like having fun with people.
Yeah. It was always just to make us laugh.
I guess the most of our time, just the two of us, was when his dad was at work at night, and so we would cook together. I taught him how to cook um, eggs. He loved hamburger helper and tuna helper. That was his big things. So we would cook together. And he was my chick flick buddy. He watched chick flicks with me all the time.
Did he cry? Dang.
Oh yes, oh yes. He cried more than I did.
Oh, as David made it into his high school years, he often had more time for friends than he would for his old man. But when he would set aside that time, we would play video games, and it would be amusing to him because each time we play a new game, he would have to teach me how to use the controllers again, and then he'd use me for target practice in some of those games. Not sure why he found that so funny, but it was how we stayed engaged and interacted, and it was those types of memories that I'll always treasure. I grew up in the Atari age, so I just had a joystick and one button to work with. So.
And what was your favorite game? Or what was your guys' favorite game to play together?
He loved Halo. For the little time I got to play it, he really enjoyed doing that. But I was usually the first one he would take out, unless he needed me for something specific. But I'll never forget. Those were good times.
Can you tell me when you noticed David's mood or personality start to change?
In college, when he was in college, he had friends, good friends, but he would almost he wouldn't acknowledge those friendships. Even he had a girlfriend, it was, oh, she doesn't love me, and they don't like me, and that kind of thing. But at other times it was, these are my friends, and so it would kind of go back and forth, where in college, where he was just, we weren't sure what was going on, but he saw a counselor, and so we figured, he's getting help for this. But it was college, definitely.
So his mood just seemed to kind of fluctuate like back and forth.
Yes.
That
The change didn't occur until around the year 2012. He became very accusatory of others. He would hear things that nobody else could hear, and he would show like odd behaviors, such as one time he was caught squeezing lemons into his eyes to cleanse them. It's just very bizarre.
Looking back now, I don't know that I ever noticed. And I don't know if that's just because he was really good at hiding it, or if because back then I was just that naive to mental health. But even like looking back on our times, like I don't ever remember a time where David wasn't laughing or joking around. And like I said, I don't know if that was because he was trying to mask what he was going through. But I there's just not a point in time where I ever remember him depressed or sad or didn't have a smile on his face. And I also moved away after high school, so between graduation in 2009 and 2013, I didn't see him a lot, except for when I came home on breaks, but even then I didn't really notice anything.
Did David ever seem depressed or did his mood spiral? Did this ever become a challenge?
No, actually, David was recently a graduate from college. He was spending time up in New York with his mother and his family, her family, and things were just going great. So he was taking, I guess, what you might call a sabbatical for about a year before he was going to move forward with either additional education endeavors or getting a job, but he was just sort of taking a break.
Said I never noticed. The times that I hung out with him, he was always trying to be upbeat with us. I vividly remember the last conversation I ever had with him, and it was probably one of the more serious conversations we ever had. But even that conversation, I didn't take that as anything other than him trying to be a serious person.
Mhm.
Um, I never had any inkling that something was wrong.
Do you feel comfortable to recap a little bit of your last conversation?
Yeah, yeah. It was 2 months before he passed away. I had come home for some, I don't even remember why I was home, but it was the weekend of our high school marching band's home show. So we did competition band, and that weekend was the home competition. And a bunch of us met up there. And the last conversation we had was just us talking about me graduating in this. I graduated that spring. He told me he was proud of me. And we actually had talked about eventually moving to Florida, because my parents also live in Florida. So we had just talked about making plans to do that after I graduated. And that was probably my favorite conversation I ever had with him.
Um, in college, he would get depressed. I wouldn't say his mood really spiraled. He would have those moments, like I said, where he'd nobody likes me at school. I don't have any friends, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say it really spiraled. But he would have did have a depression in college. A lot of most of it changed when he turned 21. Um, November, December of that year, when he turned 21 was when things really spiraled in, and he was just never himself again.
So that leads into my next question. When he was 21, was that when he was first diagnosed with bipolar?
Yeah. Well, no. That's when we first found out they had bipolar. He also was schizophrenic. Um, hear voices and stuff. Um, that's when we first knew he was diagnosed. There was an incident that happened when he was visiting family in New York, and he ended up in an institute for a few months. And that's where they had diagnosed him. After he passed, we actually got records from college, and he was diagnosed with bipolar in college, but we did not know that until long afterwards.
So he was diagnosed with both bipolar and schizophrenia?
Yes, while in the hospital the first time.
And what was the incident that happened in New York?
I wasn't there, so I only have secondhand knowledge, and I have what David said and then what family said. According to family, he jumped off the porch, which just, over a railing kind of thing, wasn't far, but on top of the hood of a car, and just started banging his head on a windshield. According to David, he was thrown, and he hit his head. But hitting his head, it's almost like it triggered something, and that is the day that he went to the mental institute, and it spiraled from there big time.
So you said you weren't around a lot when David was first diagnosed with bipolar. Sorry.
Yeah.
Could you, even though you weren't around that much, could you tell to see how he was coping with it or not coping with it?
I'll be honest, I didn't even know he had a diagnosis until after he passed away.
All
And I don't know if that's because he didn't want to tell me or if he was just keeping it a secret from a lot of people. But it wasn't until after everything happened that somebody, I honestly don't even remember who told me it was
Mhm.
that he had bipolar. I don't know if it was Amanda or one of our other friends. But looking back again, like even after hearing that, like there's and knowing the symptoms of bipolar disorder now as a professional, like I still didn't see any difference in him.
Yeah. And meeting him, you said it was a couple months before he passed, right?
Yeah, I saw the last time I saw him was October of 2013.
Yeah, and you didn't notice at all, like anything. And he
No,
didn't tell you then.
no, he seems fine. I mean, he was the David I always knew.
Behavior became so uh, erratic that it was difficult for his family and his friends. Everybody who knew David the way he was before the diagnosis to now, it was just a struggle for them to understand what's so wrong about David. There was nobody knew the whole story, so people sort of passed it off or distanced themselves from him. So it did become a challenge for him as well because with his friends and not immediate family, but other family members, he became sort of an outcast.
Did he, to your knowledge, did he tell anyone outside of family about his diagnosis?
Actually, I don't know if he did or not. I don't know if he concerned himself with that fact. He may have just looked at it a different way that people didn't want to be associated with him for whatever the reason.
Oh, he didn't cope with it at all. Because he would take the medication when, I was like forced, but coerced into it. You know, you need your medication. He did good. I mean, I would say he was never himself again, but he did good. He had his good days where it was almost like a zombie, but wasn't, on the other spectrum of it. But when he took his medicine, it was more like you read articles about people with bipolar, and oh well, I don't need it because I'm doing good. Well, that's because you're on a medication. Well, he would stop taking his medication thinking he was doing good, and he just would not believe us that he needed medication when he wasn't on it. So he never really coped with it. And when he did take his medication, it was like, I don't have that, I'm fine, I don't have that kind of thing. It was disbelief.
How did you cope with his diagnosis?
Well, David was being seen professionally uh, with hospital visits and stays, and there were some group therapies. But all of this kept the distance between him and I, where I was still living in Florida, and David was between his mother's family in New York and staying with my mom or his grandmother in Pennsylvania. So the best that I could do was really just stay in contact with him via phone. And in pretty much all cases, he would answer. So I would just try to keep him engaged and grounded that way. And there was a time even that we had brought him down to Florida. It wasn't his choice at the time. We told him that he could come and live with us, and it wasn't his greatest desire. So we did bring him down for a short time, like a visit, if you will, and and that was the end of it. Um, After that, he just pretty much had to be seen and stay within those treatment facilities where calls were limited. So
It didn't. Um, I was just there. Yeah, we lived in Florida. Um, the insurance that he was covered under, we could not cover him due to his age and not being in college any longer in Florida. So he did live between Pennsylvania, and when he was in an institute, it was mainly in New York. Um, so I would go back and forth every couple months and stay up there for a couple months, come home for a month, go back up there, just trying to help him cope with it, but I never did.
How can you take me through a little bit of his transition? We kind of already talked a little bit about this, but after David was diagnosed, how did he handle the treatment and the process of it?
Not well. When he was in an institute, he was in 3 times. When he was in, he would literally call me every day and beg me to get him out. And once I did. The other ones I knew I couldn't. But I know he didn't always take his medication in there. Kind of like you see in the movies, they would hide it. He definitely hid it. He would tell me on the phone that they were trying to poison him and drug him and make him do things, and it was the voices, telling him stuff, and that these people were bad, and it was a conspiracy, and I needed to get a hold of the government, and it was a lot of things, but I listened to him every day, but he wasn't able, I guess, mentally to engage with the counselors, engage with the nurses and stuff where he could get help. So he just didn't handle the treatment process at all. I mean, it was, nothing ever changed. It was that one night happened, whatever it was that happened, and when he went in the hospital, it was an everyday thing of people were trying to drug him, people were trying to kill him, couldn't trust family anymore. He couldn't trust his biological mom for a while, but he called me every day. It was almost, I don't know if I said something that had him trusting me, but it was whispers to me only, and he could only tell me things of what people were trying to do, what he thought they were trying to do to him. When he got out, we talked every day until probably about 2 months before the end, when he just stopped. And I would call him, and it was just pulling teeth to get him to talk about anything, cursing and bad.
Was there ever a point that you say he was stable?
No.
Through his process?
No.
Was there ever a medication that actually worked and he just wasn't taking, or you think they never really found a medication or treatment?
They treated his bipolar. They never treated the schizophrenic, and I honestly don't know what treatments there are for that, but they only treated the bipolar. So when he would take his medication, like I said, he was a zombie, but he still had those voices. Those were always there, telling him different things. There were several very weird things, he would see something and think, like he would look at you and think that your eyes are bleeding and stuff, so he would rinse his eyes with lemons, because that's what the voices told him to do. He had to use lemons to cleanse his eyes so that he would actually see the truth, and no, he was, nothing ever really worked, because they weren't treating both things. And I don't know if they could have. I don't know if they knew exactly how to treat it. But he only had medication for one thing.
Well, David really did struggle with the medication part. He would be on it for some time and then come off of it claiming that he was better and didn't need it. But with such a diagnosis, schizophrenia, it's sort of ongoing treatment. So it was difficult to coax him into continuing to take the medication. Um, he was never forced it. It was always recommended that he take the medication. But after a while, that's where his mother and I had to intervene, and he had to go back into the hospital. And there were several stays there, and there was some resentment, and he continued to blame his mother and I for that. But we weren't the professionals, and he wasn't taking the meds, and it was difficult for us to cope with that, let alone him cope with knowing that he needed the medication in order to be well and be more like himself.
What was like your role in David's life through his transition? Um, how did you support him? Which I know he didn't tell you that he had it. So how do you think, why do you think that he didn't tell you?
I ask myself that all the time. And I don't know. I do know that while we didn't talk a lot when I lived in Erie, there were times when he would like randomly text me, and I say randomly because we weren't like the kind of people to just like text each other all day every day. But if I was thinking of something that reminded me of him, I would always reach out to him, and he there were several times I remember that he would just like randomly reach out to me to just like say hi or see how I'm doing. Um, and I want to believe that that's because he might have been struggling in those times and he just needed somebody to talk to. Um, so I like to think that that's how I was supporting him, even though he didn't tell me he was struggling.
We spent a lot of time together when I was up there. When I was home, we still spent a lot of time together talking. Um, Whenever he was working. Um, Not very well, but he was working, so we would talk as much as possible. Um, but yeah, I just kind of went back and forth. I was his mom.
And you did stay with like you went up to Pennsylvania before he passed, right?
Yes.
You saw him. You worked there for a couple months before, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to spend time with
Yes.
him. How was his personality then? Was it still just...
When I was there, I was able to get him to take his medication. So he was a zombie a lot of times. We would do this kind of the same old stuff, watch movies together, go for rides together and stuff in the car. Um, but he was never able to drive because he thought he would see things. So, but he did like to ride in the car, so we would do different things together. Um, but he was never happy. So
Um, just trying to be there with him in any way that we could. Amanda and I would visit back up to Pennsylvania where he would be, and we would just spend time with him, trying to, interact with him, and also at the same time observe his moods and changes in his behavior, and just try to encourage him to take those meds and understand why he's having such a hard time with it. At that time, he was also going to a support group to help people in his situation like that. And we would try to encourage him to keep going to those groups. When we weren't there, we would continue to call him, and just try to be there for him in the best way that we knew how. So,
Did it ever seem like the David you knew when you first met him after he was diagnosed?
no, it was almost night and day. Some cases, his behavior was so, I don't know. He seemed like a zombie. Like he was stayed more in his room oftentimes. and he wasn't as outgoing. We didn't do much together, although we tried to encourage going out and doing things. His behavior was at a point where it was a little hard to control if he wasn't closely observed. Shaving his eyebrows off and wearing sunglasses in the house. It was just a very difficult time, and I've never been more helpless um, in that respect. So,
all the time.
Very covered. Yeah, like it seems.
Yeah.
I know this is an emotional topic, but can you tell us how did you find out um about that night? So what happened from your perspective the night that David passed?
So I will never forget this day. I was at that time I was working at a local Walmart where I was living, and it was like early in the morning. I was standing at my register doing nothing, and I was just scrolling through Facebook when I saw a news article, and it was a picture of David's house, and I knew right away it was his house. And I opened up the article and I started reading it, and I could just feel my whole world like crashing. So I went to the bathroom. I like shut down my register. I went to the bathroom and I started reading it more, and then I called my mom. And I couldn't believe it. Um, it was life altering. Um, but yet I still managed to finish my shift. um, because I knew going home at that point was not going to be productive for me. I immediately started texting all of our friends, so that they knew. Um, and it from that moment on, I think I just like kind of blacked out a lot of it because I was just so distraught. Um, but I will never forget when I like the moment I found out.
Um, it happened in the middle of the night. The night before, we were in Florida. He was in Pennsylvania. Um, I had gone home in November. Yeah, November. Um, we had actually gone to a Christmas party for his dad's company the night before. So we actually slept in the next morning a little bit, but we received the call on a Saturday, December 21st, around 7:30 in the morning.
So it was already 7:30.
But it happened middle of the night around 3:30.
when I received a phone call from my mom, and between the phone being handed over to the detective where they were at the police station, I learned that David had been shot and killed. Um, my mom was in tears and she was trembling over the phone, apologizing over and over again that David was gone. For me, it was extraordinary disbelief, and it was so surreal that I could hardly believe that I was hearing what I was being told. Um, just to say that I was in a state of shock was an understatement. My only son was gone.
What emotions were you feeling when you saw that article?
Immediately, my emotion was heartbroken, distraught, and then I went into feeling numb for a very long time.
I was pissed off. It was kind of like, no, this is bullshit. This didn't actually happen. I'm gonna call David and find out what actually happened. What are they talking about? So shock. disbelief. I called his biological mom, and I probably shouldn't have been the one to do it because I was still in disbelief at that point, until I called my mom. So just a lot of I didn't believe it. I thought they were, you know, don't want to say it was a prank, but what are they talking about? That's not David. Nothing happened. So it took a while to click, but disbelief.
My heart was broken in a million pieces. I am normally not an overly emotional person because I've seen a lot of death in my life. My younger brother passing, my father, my grandfather, and I've just been so emotionally drained. But it's still a journey even after all this time, and there are days that I will lose sleep over thinking about what took place.
What happened when you got there? Was it kind of the same type of story, or did you find out more?
I found out more, but it was the same, but I found out more details. More, it became real. They had the outline on the floor, gunshots in the walls. So it just became even more real. And there's more details of it.
And I know there's quite a bit of different stories because no one really knows the true story because it was David and the police officer, and his grandma was downstairs at the time. But what do you believe that happened?
David was having one of his moments, I guess, and
Like a manic episode.
yeah, he was never dangerous in any way ever. Just a little out there, and he had come upstairs, obviously in the middle of the night, and woken up his grandma and told her he wanted to go for a ride, and they didn't have a car. So he said he wanted to go for a ride, and she said, "David, we don't have a car." And he said, "Yeah, we'll get one. We'll get one." And she said, "Well, I don't know how to drive," and so he takes her hand and just showed her how to drive. And anyway, just kind of scared her a little bit, but not physically, just what's happening kind of thing. And she didn't know if maybe he needed to go back into the hospital or just some help. She had called the police a couple of times before then, and there was one officer that would come and kind of calm David down. So that was the hope, I think. Well,
So
she
she's called the police before.
Yes, and someone has come and just kind of calmed. David was never arrested. He was never taken or anything like that. Just kind of calmed it so that she felt more comfortable. She wasn't prepared to care for him. And so the police officer came. It was a different one. He had been there before, but he had not been the main point of contact with David. Well, when David saw the lights outside, someone, cop pulling up, he told her that they needed to run and hide because they were there to kill them. And she told him, "No, I'm gonna get the door. It's okay." He kept yelling at her, "No, they're here to kill us." And so she let the cop in, and David felt threatened the entire time, and he kept telling him, "Get out, get out, get out." The police officer ended up trying to make David sit down, kind of thing, and so there was a fight, a big fight apparently, where he ended up tasering David. David, I guess at that point felt very threatened and thought he was gonna be killed. So he went and he got a knife, and he was standing in front of the police officer that saw on the report. He never went after him, but he was standing in front of him and he had the knife up. And instead of leaving the opposite way that he could have, the officer apparently got scared and shot him. And he shot wildly because 2 shots hit on the wall, and David was no more than 3 or 4 feet from him, and he shot above him, shot over, almost shot his grandmother, went right above her head. That was it.
But he also contacted David 6 times.
He shot him 6 times.
David was not armed. The only thing he had in his hand was the telephone he used in which to attempt to call the 911 operator. David had asked the officer to leave the premises, because at that point, David was so incredibly startled, he was more scared than anything, and asked if the officer could then leave. But that's not how the officer saw it, and went ahead and placed his hands on David, and that's when the altercation ensued. There was a brief fight, and over the course of 20 minutes, there were different things that occurred. This is just based on general knowledge. My mother, while she was there as a witness, was actually waiting for backup, and the situation took place upstairs and she was downstairs, so she didn't quite see it. So the information I'm providing is based on specifics of an autopsy report and from the police officer's statement. But there was physical damage to my son's body before David defended himself by going into the kitchen and grabbing a knife. And it was at that time the police officer shot him, point blank range. Rather than trying to leave, and in the place that David was shot, the police officer was standing in the kitchen where there were 3 exits, including the one that he was standing in. But instead he stood his ground, and instead of disabling David from attacking with a knife, he just shot him dead with 6 rounds to his chest.
What do you think David wanted to accomplish by calling the police?
Well, I think, just maybe possible home invasion. I think he, with considering his diagnosis, I don't know that he was, I think in his mind, he sincerely believed that there was a problem, and he felt like somebody might get ready to be breaking into the house, and he was just simply calling for help. And that was in his eyes, So but that's when it all started.
When his grandmother went downstairs to call 911 because she didn't want David to know, she picked up the phone. It's a house line. She picked up the phone and it was already on, and 911 answered. David had the phone, but he never said anything. He just stood there breathing. And that's all that she heard. So she hung up her end and went back upstairs. And I guess David had hung up his. So she went back down and called 911 and had them come.
So he was already trying to contact. What do you think he wanted to accomplish by calling the police?
Subconsciously get help.
I really want to believe that he thought he was doing the right thing. that he thought if he called, he would get the help he needed. I definitely don't believe that he called for it to end the way it did. Um, I really want to believe that he thought that by calling somebody, he was going to get help. And I can't imagine a world where that isn't what was going through his mind.
So, in lieu of doing this interview, I've done research for police brutality against mental health. And more than 1 in 5 people are fatally shot by police and have mental illnesses, according to Washington Post. Since 2015, when the Post launched its database, police have fatally shot more than 1,400 people with mental illnesses. This is from NBC News. How do these statistics change/solidify your thoughts, feelings towards our justice system?
It just proves what we tried to accomplish afterwards, and were knocked away every time. Is police need more training. They need more training to deal with this kind of thing. When you go out there, you can't assume that someone is literally trying to hurt you or trying to cause an issue. Like I said, who was in a good mood until they got there. Um, they need more training. They have to protect themselves. I do understand that, but when there are other options, they need those other options to. They need the knowledge of those other options.
After everything happened, I had a lot of hatred towards, and I don't want to say towards all law enforcement officers or first responders. Um, Towards our police department, I had a lot of hatred. I couldn't understand why they did it. Now that I'm in this profession though, it it solidifies for me that more education needs to be done, more training needs to be done. I know that no first responder, law enforcement officer wants to go out and do that to somebody. That's not what they set out to do. Um, but I know that without training and education, it's going to continue to happen. And I I never want other families and friends to feel what David's family and David's friends have felt for the last 10 years.
I think in part the justice system is slightly broken. I believe that police need more training on the topic of mental illness and how to properly diagnose an individual when on scene that may potentially have uh, that type of illness, that type of condition, without first making presumptions. Um, I think oftentimes that police may reach for their guns before, analyzing the situation properly, and in that case, becoming more presumptuous and maybe just a little bit too gung ho, if you will. Um, I don't think that all police officers realize that when a victim with a mental health condition is being approached by a police officer, that they realize that the police officer in turn realizes that that person could be afraid. They could be unaware of what's taking place and scared. And if they reach for a weapon, whatever that might be, It may be simply not to attack, but rather in self defense because they don't know what else to do and they need that kind of help. But if the police react too quickly, well, then, sometimes it's too late before the situation is truly understood. I need help. Will you please help me? I don't know what's happening to me. And I just don't think there's enough training for that.
To recap, you said that you're in the profession. Can you just recap what you do and why you chose that profession?
Yeah, so starting with why I chose this profession, it was because of David. I I graduated with my bachelor's this summer or the spring after David passed away. I had my bachelor's in social work. I never at that point I never wanted to be a therapist. I thought I was just gonna work in like a hospice center. But then David passed away. I ended up moving to Florida and I got my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. Um, and for 5 years, I was actually a drug and alcohol counselor. And then I moved back here. And once I finished my master's degree, I started working at inpatient psychiatric hospital. And for the last 3 years, that's where I've worked. Um, and for the last year, I've actually worked on the unit. There's 6 different units in my hospital, but I work with the individuals who have serious mental illnesses. So individuals who have bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and that is all because of David. I want to give individuals the resources they need and the encouragement they need to be able to go on and live their life the way they're supposed to be living it, with medications and with supports. Because like I said, I don't want any other family or friend to have to go through what we've all gone through the last 10 years.
That's amazing. What would you say to David right now if he was standing in front of you?
I've thought about this so many times the last couple of years. The very first thing, if he was with me right now, the very first thing I would do is hug him. It's one of the things I miss most is his hugs. Um, and then I would probably tell him that I wish he would have said something to me sooner. I wish he would have let me be there for him more. Um, but also I would remind him how much he's loved. Um, and just let him know that there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about him.
I love you. And that I'll always be proud of you and that you are my hero.
I love him. I talk to him quite a bit. I like to take long drives and I talk to him. So I talk to him all the time. So just I love him.
Lastly, is there a message that you would like to give people? Something that people are watching this that you want them to know?
Yeah. If you have a mental health diagnosis, you do not have to suffer alone. You don't have to suffer at all. There's help out there. 10 years ago, there might not have been the same amount of help that there is now, but there are resources. Talk to somebody, anybody. Even if you don't, even if you think that there's people out there that don't care about you, you're wrong. There are. And more importantly, if you have a family member who has a mental health diagnosis, please educate yourself. There's so much research out there on different diagnoses. There's so much support out there for family members. You also don't have to go through this alone. It's just important to talk about it.
They need training. Police need training on how to deal with with people with mental issues. There are so many people out there with mental issues that can't get help, don't get help. They need the support from everybody, but police, when they show up to a scene, they need the knowledge to handle the scene, to take care of whatever it may be, whether it's a mental issue or not. You don't know, and they need that. They need to know how to, tell the difference in that kind of thing.
Cops' actions are getting swept under the carpet. And my son was not something from a horror show, as the DA from the Lancashire County said. David has a gentle soul and was talented, bright, and loving. Also, I feel when a cop is involved in such horrific events, it should not be investigated by their colleagues, but rather an objective third party. Cops live under what is known as the blue curtain. That is to say, it's a term for an informal code of silence. Essentially, the police officers in the U.S. protect their own and conceal colleagues' errors in and off the field. Let me just say that if David's case ever went to the courtroom, there would be several misjustices that would be revealed. Thinking about it just makes me sick. My son did not deserve 6 bullets to the chest. The cop who did this retired after David's incident. If he wasn't guilty, what does that say for him? And then lastly, statistics of late show that approximately 50 million people in the world today suffer at least one form of mental illness. And in those cases, most do not receive proper treatment. I believe all first responders should receive some form of crisis intervention training at least once a year to help those in the field properly diagnose symptoms on site of those with some form of possible mental health condition, and to help them determine a suitable approach to that individual as opposed to taking matters into their own hands.
Thank you for what you do and what you do for David. That is really amazing that you follow that path for him and for all those people out there that are like him and that have been struggling. It's coming up on 10 years in December. And that's why it's was very important for me to get his story out there and to pass it on for people that are like David and for people that are struggling, for his voice and for those voices to be heard that feel like they are silent. And I want to give those silent voices a voice. And so I really appreciate you helping me with that, and for uh, doing this interview, and for giving David a voice and for helping us with that. So thank
Of
you
course.
so much for that.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.